Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, October 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Penn State game is today, the game against Michigan in 35 days. You know we're all about letting you guys behind the scenes on this show, and we're going to let you get behind the scenes on this one. This is not the first Saturday episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning we have recorded this week. It's not even the first one I did with Tony Gerdeman. You will hear the episode that we did record earlier in the week. Recorded that on Thursday, early afternoon, previewing some of the big games of the weekend. You'll see that on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning feed a little bit later on. But right after we recorded that, some fascinating news dropped involving the University of Michigan, allegations of sign stealing, and much, much more. So we're going to be talking about that today, and then you'll get the game preview a little later on. And when you're wondering, why are they talking about the Michigan sign stealing thing when they're previewing Michigan State? Well, it was just a few minutes early. Sometimes you record a little too early, and then the world changes. So all the game analysis probably stays pretty much the same, but you'll get that later. So right now, let's talk a little bit about that Michigan sign stealing scandal, the allegations against Michigan that they had someone who was scouting in person, which is against NCAA rules, and potentially violating NCAA rules in terms of how they were relaying signals. This is a story that's still playing out, and I think the first thing we need to get on the record is this is something where you do not want to be jumping to any firm conclusions yet. This is a good rule of thumb in political stories or world news stories or any sort of breaking news situation. A lot of the stuff that comes out in the first hours after a story breaks ends up down the line being only partially or not at all true. Wanted to let this play out for about 24 hours before we did a real deep dive on it. So I'm going to bring in our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com to sort of just take a look at this story, what we've learned so far in terms of the initial reporting, Michigan's initial response, some of the response to Michigan's initial response, and the sort of second-order reporting from guys like Pete Thamel. Tony, just start running us through exactly what are the allegations against Michigan here.
Well, and it's more, as you said, it's more than just sign stealing. It's understood basically from people around the country, around college football, that Michigan has done a good job of stealing signs. That in itself is not illegal, a violation. So that's not all of the story. There's other parts of in-person scouting, going to future opponents' games, scouting them, shooting allegedly, or perhaps when you're there scouting in person, you're just going to shoot the signals coming in for the plays, and then match that up with the plays themselves when you get back to the office. There's that. There's, perhaps communicating signals via electronics, which could mean anything. That's signaling to something to a coach or to an analyst or whoever, and then signaling it down with your headphones, talking through all of that stuff. All of that is electronics to me. So stuff like that is the main crux. And so that's where we are now, and I'll let you have it now, Tom.
Well, okay. So, and I know that there's going to be an immediate reaction, and there has been like an immediate pushback from Michigan folks on this. Ohio State folks have jumped on this with a tremendous amount of glee, as well as other folks from around college football. And the Michigan folks, there's been like real harsh pushback on this, and everyone does this. And I was just down at the College Gameday set on Friday morning, and Desmond Howard was on the Stephen A. Smith show and basically did the "What's a Moida" thing with, I didn't even know, frankly, Stephen A., I didn't even know this was against the rules. And, first of all, that's kind of non-responsive to the question of did it happen or not. But it's also, you have these, I think there's sort of the baked in idea that because the site that we work for has Buckeye in the name, that we are, coming at this as a very partial, biased angle. So while I was down there, I talked to Rece Davis, who is neither an Ohio State person nor a Michigan person. He is actually, I believe, an Alabama grad, but, the host of College Gameday, a fairly neutral arbiter of things on the sport. This is not Kirk Herbstreit. This is not Desmond Howard. It's Rece Davis. So I asked him, basically what they're accused of here. Is this something that it happens all the time? Is this completely unheard of in the college football world? Here was his answer on that.
No, that is not completely unheard of. I think what has happened is when they changed the rule in the mid-90s, to disallow in-person scouting, then it became sort of a forbidden, taboo thing to do. It's clearly against the rules, and if proven to be true, it's over the top, and you can't do it. There's no doubt about that. But sign stealing goes back forever. We were at Texas, Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago, and Darrell Royal was so mad at Barry Switzer over the allegations that Barry and Larry Lacewell had sent spies to Texas practice to scout them and steal their signs, that Gerald Ford, the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, was there between them, and he couldn't get them to acknowledge each other. So sign stealing, I mean, that's as old as sports. And there's nothing wrong with it. If someone steals your signs, get better signs. But if this is true, this is beyond the pale, deserves punishment. It's cheating. Sign stealing, there's a fine line between cheating and gamesmanship. But if you send somebody into a stadium and for the express purpose of taping, sealing, scouting the signs, and it is clearly written in the rule book that you're not supposed to scout in person, it's against the rules. It's as simple as that. It's not an affront to nature. It's just beyond the pale, and it's cheating if they did it. But that remains to be seen. I think the funny thing about it is this notion that that's the only way they could have possibly gotten the signs. Typically, everybody uses the TV copy, to get the signs, and there's a lot of sign stealing that goes on. Brent Venables is a master of it. No one's ever accused him of doing things outside the rule book, but he's a master of it, and he's not the only one.
All right, so that was Rece Davis and his thoughts on just the general vibe of the whole thing. Now, I asked him a follow-up question on this. The in-person element of this, the in-person scouting, going in advanced scouting on this, why is that a bigger deal? Like he mentioned, hey, it's a bigger deal because that's illegal. So it's against the rules. But why is it against the rules? The rule was initially made in 1994 in a lot of sense because of costs associated with traveling to all these games. So why is it that much of a bigger deal? If it was outlawed because of cost, why is it so much of a bigger deal to scout in person? It would give you a significant advantage over the typical type of watching on TV, trying to look across the field and steal signs during the game, which is sort of an accepted part of the game. Why is there a big dark line between those two things in terms of acceptability? Here was his answer.
You could see every play. I mean, if you're doing the TV copy, you may or may not get a really good look at all of the guys the guys who are signaling in the plays and the guys who are signaling decoy plays. You may not get a great look at it all the time. Therefore, you're probably ahead of the game. I'll give you an example. This goes on in all level of sports. My son played college baseball at Princeton and at Duke, and when he was at Duke, we were playing William & Mary, and they had the system where they had a number system. They signaled in the pitches. Well, William & Mary decoded it because they from the dugout, they saw how a guy was, marking off which column they were marking off numbers, and they figured out what it was. And, they gave our pitchers a hard time for a little while until we figured it out. Nobody, there's been accusations, even a great program like Vanderbilt in baseball, not in a way that's against the rules, but Vanderbilt's had people signs a ton, and they changed now to that Apple Watch thing in college baseball. So, I mean, this is, the difference is if you're in person in the stadium and you've got your iPhone out, you can get every one of them, go back against the game tape and figure out what it was. And, there's some people that are better at it than others, but this is, the idea that, oh my gosh, signs are being stolen. Hey, everybody steals signs, and if you don't like that, get better signs. But this part of it is against the rules.
All right, so that was Rece Davis from College Gameday weighing in on those two subjects. Wanted to give you a little bit of kind of an independent, nonpartisan view on any of this. We're trying to be as straightforward as we can and play this as down the middle as we can. And we feel like you deserve an impartial view of this. So, Tony, I think the big news that broke on Friday morning was a report from Pete Thamel of ESPN. And Pete Thamel is one of the most respected college football reporters. He works for ESPN. Pete Thamel and Mark Schlabach released a report. And what was fascinating to me about this report is a lot of the stuff that came out Thursday was sort of vague. And it was, Michigan is doing this stuff. And, there's a big organizational setup that helps them do this stuff. But it was all a little bit vague. Then on Friday, the report from Pete Thamel, who again is this is not just random Joe Blow. This is one of the more well-sourced college football reporters. And he had a name. He put a name on it. He put on, he cited all the specific NCAA bylaws, but put the specific name of a Michigan staffer on this thing. And, you look at that, and when you start getting a little more specifics from a credible reporter, I think that, to me, gives this a little bit more than just, at some point this becomes a little more than just a he said, she said kind of situation. It feels like when you're starting to put specific names on stuff, that makes me think there's, there's a little more smoke there.
Yeah, when you have the names and really, or a name, the first thing that stood out to me through all of this, which gave it some validity before we knew all of the story or as much as we do now, is when the Big Ten came out and essentially warned future opponents, like, hey, just so you know, this investigation is going on. I don't think I've ever heard of that before. I've never seen anything like that before. No conference I've ever seen has warned future opponents or alerted future opponents about what a school is being accused of or that there's an investigation going on. So that was like the first red flag for me. And then, of course, you've got the name, and then we're seeing quotes come out from not named sources, but schools. The school has been named of players or people speaking out about what they've seen and confrontations they've had with the guy. And so there's some corroboration with the report from several sides, and maybe the Michigan side says, well, those are just sour grapes that they got beat and all of these things, but it is no longer an open secret. It feels like this is going to become more and more of open to everybody because people are going to be willing to talk. And, we've talked about how the whole coaching profession, the omerta regarding NIL, this seems to be something that I don't know that people are going to be putting their name to it, but it seems like this is something they're going to be willing to talk about.
And I think, speaking of putting a name to it, I don't think we actually ever said the name, and it is a Heisman level name, Connor Stalions. I mean, man, oh man, that is a name of the year candidate in college football. He is the football analyst, for Michigan, a retired captain in the United States Marine Corps. He was the one who is accused of, or implicated in potentially going and doing some of this in-person scouting. In his LinkedIn bio, it says he, quote, attempts to, quote, employ Marine Corps philosophies and tactics into the sport of football regarding strategies in staffing, recruiting, scouting, intelligence, planning, and more. Among the skills he listed in his LinkedIn were, quote, identifying the opponent's most likely course of action and most dangerous course of action, and, quote, identifying and exploiting critical vulnerabilities and centers of gravity in the opponent scouting process. Boy, Tony, that's, I can see why he might have been identified as the person based solely on that publicly identifiable information. You can sort of see why there might be some view that he is involved in this from, legal or not, whatever his role is, that he has become sort of a central figure in this investigation.
Yeah. And one of the questions was, how long has this been going on? Because the initial reports didn't really have an idea or didn't really get into the time frame, but now it seems like the reports have it going back a couple of years, and Connor Stalions has been associated with the program since Harbaugh arrived 2015 as a part-time volunteer for, I think, the defensive staff, and then got hired in full-time in 2022. If you wanted to be a conspiracy theorist and put some math together, like what happened in 2021 to convince Jim Harbaugh that, hey, this guy should be put on staff full-time and in a larger manner? Well, I don't know. They beat Ohio State that year. Perhaps something is there. But like, that's the problem with stuff like this. It just creates until you have all of the answers. You're trying to piece it together, and point A to point B to point C, and sometimes you jump to J, and then you have to come back to D. And this is probably going to be one of those things. But until the answers come out, we're going to have to speculate and try to be careful with the speculation. But yeah, this is just another chapter in the Jim Harbaugh versus the NCAA legacy.
And, there has been limited response from Harbaugh and Michigan. All of it has sort of centered around, the idea that he has no idea what's going on, has never seen or heard any rumors of this. The statement said he would fully cooperate in any investigations, which, I think if you look back at some of the stuff around the, hamburger, et cetera, investigation, I don't think the NCAA has felt that he has fully cooperated in that investigation, but perhaps this one's a little different. But he says he, quote, doesn't, quote, condone or tolerate anyone doing anything illegal or against NCAA rules. I do not have any knowledge or information regarding the University of Michigan football program illegally stealing signals, nor have I directed any staff member or others to participate in an off-campus scouting assignment, close quote. Now, the interesting question here, Tony, is not what are you accused of, but what can you prove? I had a long conversation with my kids today about, they were asking me about this story, and I said, okay, so here's what they're accused of. The question is, what can you prove? Because the NCAA has had lots of investigations recently. They spent 6 years on Kansas basketball and ended up with something, maybe, I don't know. I mean, what can the NCAA prove? And the real question at this point, and this is where we are delving into speculation a little bit, is what proof is there right now? Because we don't know exactly who is behind the report to the NCAA. I think there's certainly been speculation. There was speculation about Greg Schiano based on a halftime interview at the Rutgers game against Michigan this year. There's been speculation that it was Ryan Day who's behind this, or the Ohio State football program that's behind us. And I don't think we've gotten a firm answer on any of that yet in terms of who is actually behind this. But the question then is, okay, what proof did they bring to the NCAA? Because if you knew who this guy was in advance, if you knew, if this person had been identified, there has been plenty of reporting about Michigan being pretty good at getting opposing team signs going back to previous seasons. So if you knew who this guy was and you had identified him before, is there photos? Are there photos? Is there video of this guy in the stands at UNLV or Rutgers or Bowling Green or wherever this is alleged to have occurred this year? Michigan State, perhaps last weekend. Is that why this is happening now? Is there some kind of proof of this? Can they go through security footage? I mean, I don't know I don't know the exact state of facial recognition technology right now, but are there cameras in stadiums where you could find this, hey, here is this guy at these games doing this thing? Because if not, you might get into a situation where there's suspicion but not proof, but it feels like there certainly could be proof, and we don't know yet exactly what level of proof has been proffered yet to back up these charges.
I wonder if you can also get his location, traveling through the computer, cell phone, things like that. How deep do you have to go to get this? And then if information is wiped, why? And we've seen that question over the years. Why did this phone get wiped? And why did this get, what's wrong with the data on this computer? So I think there are ways to match things up, but is that circumstantial? Like what were you doing in Bowling Green? Oh, I was Fuddruckers. I was at the Fuddruckers. And, how precise, but it can get pretty precise with the location and GPS, stuff like that. He had to turn over his computer apparently, or they have a computer. So the kind of information that is in there, even if it's not data directly tied to here are all of the videos that I've taken, like I would think there'd still be like location and things like that, that they may be able to get into. It's one thing after another right now with the Harbaugh thing in Michigan. And, however this turns out is, I'm with you. I don't know what the punishment would be, because I don't even think they don't have a punishment listed for this crime, which I don't know if that's carte blanche or if it's, like, do you create the punishment, or is this just, we're going to chalk it up to a level 1 or whatever?
Yeah. And that's an interesting question, because this is not, hey, you stole an item from a store that was $1,000 or more, and therefore you are facing 3 to 12 months in prison or whatever. There are not sentencing guidelines on this in the NCAA rules, as far as I have been able to tell. So yeah, where does this go from here? And that probably means there's a lot of leeway in terms of the NCAA, and some of that is probably going to be determined based on, number one, again, what can they prove? And we don't know that answer yet. And number two, how broadly was this known? How broadly was, how many people were involved in this? And there was, in the Pete Thelma report, there were suggestions that this was a pretty broad reaching thing. And this is the kind of thing that would be very hard to chalk up to one bad apple. If one guy is traveling to games and getting signs in advance, it feels like that's something that probably people would have, someone else in the building knows about that because otherwise, you're not able to put the information to use. How did you get this information? And in order to put the information into use, the coordinators who are making the play calls would have to know, hey, here's what the signal is, or here's what this means. So, you're getting into other people who are involved. And there is an assumption now under NCAA rules that the head coach knows. You can't just, I didn't know. That's no longer really considered an acceptable excuse under the NCAA. So, if they can prove that this was going on, then you're getting into, people don't know the name Connor Stalions, or didn't 24 hours ago. They know the name Jim Harbaugh. They know the names of the offensive and defensive coordinators. That's a pretty notable thing. And I thought one of the other thing that was notable was Ward Manuel's statement. The Michigan AD said, I want to personally assure you that U of M Athletics will offer its complete cooperation to the NCAA in this matter. At the University of Michigan, all of us are committed to the highest standards of ethics and integrity for all members of our community. This is the same expectation I have of all coaches, staff, and student athletes. Given the ongoing investigation, I'll have no further comments at this time. That feels to me, Tony, like a statement. You can't make that statement and then say, well, technically by the letter of the law, you're sure the spirit of the law was bent a little bit. But if that's the position you're going to take, I think you have kind of drawn a real line in the sand that you don't have a lot of wiggle room if this investigation comes back with, hey, these things provably did happen.
Is this a comment from an athletic director who doesn't necessarily love his head coach? Like, there's some butting of the heads that have gone on between both of those guys, and this feels like an opportunity to just kind of further put that wedge in there, or to maybe get the upper hand a little bit and just put it out there. But when whatever happens here, the level of backtracking or moving forward on this, if this is the thing that undoes Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and Jim Harbaugh just rides off into the sunset with the NFL next year, like, if he doesn't own up to anything and he's only served a 3-game suspension, what does the NCAA then do to Michigan, who would seemingly have gotten off scot-free for what the NCAA would view as violations? Like, do they then have to hand something down to Michigan because the guy who did it is gone and they still need a pound of flesh?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I did read that Ward Manuel statement with the real dark line in the sand, and the phrase "for cause" popped into my head. And again, that's several steps down the line, but it does feel like, you could read that and interpret that as setting yourself up to end someone's employment in terms of a for cause situation. Another thing that I wanted to touch on real quickly was some of the response from folks who cover Michigan. And this is from Michigan podcast, which is, I think, Steve Deese, his podcast. He put on Twitter, I wanted to wait to comment until I saw what Michigan said first. A little birdie who has been pretty reliable in the past and fairly well known in Michigan circles told me a month ago he heard about these sorts of allegations as it potentially pertains to Matt Weiss, and that may explain why no follow-up about the strange and unexplained dismissal of the former offensive coordinator. So Matt Weiss, of course, was terminated last December, I believe, and it was, basically illegally accessing computers, and that was sort of the allegation that he had illegally accessed someone's email account. To me, Tony, I think you can read that as it's all the guy who wasn't here now, that it was all his fault. That, though, also is sort of suggestive to me of, okay, if you knew that guy was, he was terminated as a result of this, if that's how you want to read that, and that's how it's being interpreted in this case, then you knew what Stalions was doing, right? I mean, there's really no way to interpret that other than, well, he got it from something, right? So then you knew that was happening. The guy is still on your coaching staff. He's in contact with your coordinators. That to me, I think that was sort of thrown out as a potentially exculpatory thing. Like, oh, look, the guy who did the bad thing is gone now, so it's not a problem. Again, this is all just reading something that was put out by someone who is citing sources within the little birdies within the Michigan football program, and I have no way to verify whether or not this is entirely fanciful or real, but I don't think that's as exculpatory as maybe it's being presented as.
No, because Jim Harbaugh can't say, I don't even know why I fired him. There's obviously a reason why he did it. And if the reason is this, then this can't be the first you've heard of it. And that math doesn't follow. And the fact that you have kept the person who was also doing this allegedly on staff, then further, you've condoned it at that point. Like, if you fired one person for this and kept the other guy on staff, then why are we to assume that this has all stopped? And if the Big Ten is warning future opponents that this is going on or has gone on, then clearly it hasn't stopped. So I don't think that washes away any of this. The scapegoat, he's gone. You can't put any of this on him, because if it's still going on, I don't think they would fire him and then he would go out and travel and do these things and send stuff back voluntarily. Like, here are some signals that I've taken, have at it. Like, it's very bridge too far on that one.
Yeah. And, again, I think one thing I do want to draw as we're sort of wrapping this up, a pretty clear distinction here is there are a lot of people, a lot of the initial reaction, especially from Michigan folks, is, yeah, well, everyone steals signs. And I think that's true. I think that is a long and storied history, and talked to Rece Davis about that. You heard from Rece Davis about that a little bit earlier in the show. But it does feel like there is a very clear and, a clear dark line between, yes, everyone steals signals, and doing it electronically, doing it in advance. Asked him about that as well earlier in the show. This is the difference between the runner on second base figuring out that, hey, your signals are, it's a third signal after the first time you put down two or whatever, and signaling that into the batter, versus what the Houston Astros were accused of. That is viewed as a very clear distinction in sports. So again, a lot of this is going to depend on what's provable, but it does feel like, that I think, Tony, is a very important distinction for people to understand, that the everybody does it is true of sign stealing, but it's not necessarily true of this type of sign stealing.
Yeah, you've basically allegedly created an entire position, and you've set aside some payroll for it. And I don't know if the travel expenses can be FOIA'd and things like that, where you can find out where this person has gone. But it's very different to have a staffer up in the press box during a game, trying to figure things out. And all of this is happening so quickly during a game that you can only get so much out of it. It's the pre-preparation over weeks and then the game leading up to the week with all of the sign stealing that I think is really where it pays off. But we've seen, Brent Venables at Clemson was very good at it, but would also get his calls in late because they're looking to see exactly what signals come in. And so that stuff has happened. And again, we've never seen the ACC come out and say, hey, everybody, just be aware. Like to me, that's clear indication that this goes way beyond everybody else does it, because you don't get these statements from the Big Ten or these actions from the Big Ten or the NCAA every day, because this is not an everyday thing that has happened.
Yeah. And again, there's all of this has to sort of play out in the investigation, in the NCAA and the Big Ten punishment system, if it comes to that. But there's enough smoke here in a couple different directions in terms of the Big Ten's response, in terms of some of the reporting from Pete Thamel and others on this topic, that it feels like it's not nothing. The odds that this is absolutely nothing and completely fanciful are probably not real high based on some of the initial responses. We'll have to keep an eye on things. We'll continue to let this whole process play out. And I think it's way too soon to make, firm judgments on, they need to vacate this, or they need to fire that guy, or they need to whatever. Let the whole process play out. But it is very interesting now that we're sort of through the initial reporting, first response from Michigan, first response from the reporting side again. It's sort of interesting to see how this is you can sort of see it taking shape. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that stuff. We're also going to keep an eye on the football field, where Ohio State is going to be playing Penn State this weekend. Should be a very eventful game at the Horseshoe. Kickoff at noon on Saturday. We'll be, boy, Tony, there's going to be plenty to talk about. Oh boy, is there going to be plenty to talk about before and after that game. Is one of the biggest games of the college football season. Don't want that to get completely lost here as we head into the college football Saturday. Buckeyes and Nittany Lions at noon. We will have our full post-game coverage at the end of that game at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. That is going to be a game that is going to have a major, major impact on the Big Ten East race, the Big Ten Championship, and the college football playoff hunt as well. Make sure you are at BuckeyeHuddle.com for full coverage of all of that, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. And of course, follow us on all of our podcasts. Should be a busy recruiting weekend as well. Lots of big visitors in town. Going to be a lot to talk about, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.